Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Orientation from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Orientation. The orientation of a lodge is its situation due east and west. The word is derived from the technical language of architecture, where it is applied in the expression orientation of churches to designate a similar direction in building. Although Masonic lodges are still, when circumstances will permit, built on an east and west direction, the explanation of the usage contained in the old lectures of the 18th century that it was because all chapels and churches are, or ought to be so, has become obsolete, and other symbolic reasons are assigned. Nevertheless, there can be no doubt that such was really the origin of the usage. The orientation of churches was a principle of ecclesiastical architecture, very generally observed by builders, in accordance with ecclesiastical law from the earliest times after the apostolic age. Thus, in the apostolic constitutions, which although falsely attributed to St. Clement, are yet of great antiquity, we find the express direction, sit aedes oblonga ad orientem, versus, let the church be of an oblong form directed to the east, a direction which would be strictly applicable in the building of a lodge room. St. Charles Borromeo, in his Instructiones Fabricae Ecclesiasticae, is still more precise and directs that the rear or altar part of the church shall look directly to the east, in orientem versus recta spectat, and that it shall be not ad solstitialem sed ad equinoc, tialem orientem, not to the solstitial east, which varies by the deflection of the sun's rising, but to the equinoctial east, where the sun rises at the equinoxes, that is to say, due east. But we must not forget that, as Bingham, Antiquities, Book the 7th, Chapter 3, admits, although the usage was very general to erect churches toward the east, yet it admitted of exceptions as necessity or expediency. And the same exception prevails in the construction of lodges, which, although always erected due east and west, where circumstances will permit, are sometimes from necessity built in a different direction. But whatever may be externally the situation of the lodge with reference to the points of the compass, it is always considered internally that the master's seat is in the east, and therefore that the lodge is situated due east and west. As to the original interpretation of the usage, there is no doubt that the Masonic was derived from the ecclesiastical. That is, that lodges were at first built east and west because churches were. Nor can we help believing that the church borrowed and Christianized its symbol from the pagan reverence for the place of sun rising. The admitted reverence in Freemasonry for the East as the place of light gives to the usage the modern Masonic interpretation of the symbol of orientation. The Fardie of Fadorn, printed in 1555, has a quaint description of church arrangement. This curious essay is found in the Symbolism of Churches and Church Ornaments, 1906, John M. Neal and Benjamin Webb. Fardie, by the way, means package or bundle. The importance of the direction of the building is indicated by the positive instructions. Oratories, temples, or places of prayer, which we call churches, might not be built without the goodwill of the bishop of the diocese. And when the timber was ready to be framed and the foundation dug, it behooved them to send for the bishop to hallow the first cornerstone of the foundation, and to make the sign of the cross upon it, and to lay it and direct it just east and west. And then might the masons set upon the stone, but not before. This church did they use to build after the fashion of a cross, and not unlike the shape of a man. The chancel, in which is contained the high altar and the choir, directed fully in the east, represented the head, and therefore ought to be somewhat round and much shorter than the body of the church. And yet, upon respect that the head is the place for the eyes, it ought to be of more light and to be separate with a partition in the stead of a neck from the body of the church. This partition the Latin calls cancelli, and out of that comes our term chancel. On each side of this chancel, perhaps, for so fits it best, should stand a turret, as it were for 2 ears, and in these the bells to be hung to call the people to service by day and by night. Under one of these turrets there is commonly a vault, whose door opens into the choir, and in this are laid up the hallowed vessels and ornaments and other utensils of the church. We call it a vestry. The other part ought to be fitted that, having as it were on each side an arm, the rest may resemble the body, with the feet stretched in breadth and in length. On each side of the body, the pillars to stand, upon whose coronets or heads the vault or roof of the church may rest, and to the foot beneath altars to be joined. Those altars to be orderly, always covered with 2 altar cloths, and garnished with the cross of Christ, or some little coffer of relics, at each end a candlestick and a book toward the middle. The walls to be painted without and within, and diversely painted. That they also should have in every parish a fair round stone, made hollow and fit to hold water, in which the water consecrated for baptism may be kept for the christening of children. Upon the right hand of the high altar, that there should be an almori, either cut into the wall or framed upon it, in which they would have the sacrament of the Lord's body, the holy oil for the sick, and chrismatory always to be locked. Furthermore, they would have that there should be a pulpit in the middle of the church, wherein the priest may stand on Sundays and holidays to teach the people those things that it behooves them to know. The chancel to serve only for the priests and clerks, the rest of the temporal multitude to be in the body of the church, separate notwithstanding, the men on the right side and the women on the left. Messrs. Neal and Webb show in their introduction the tendency of the earliest churches to produce an antitype to the typical tabernacle, and also that it has been pointed out that a Christian church built at Edessa in 202 AD with 3 parts was expressly after the model of the temple. Referring to the apostolic constitutions, we are told, the church, they say, must be oblong in form and pointing to the east. The oblong form was meant to symbolize a ship, the ark which was to save us from the stormy world. The Church of Saints Vincenzo and Anastasio at Rome, near San Paolo alle Trefontane, built by Honorius I, 630 AD, has its wall curved like the ribs of a ship. The Constitution itself refers to the resemblance of this oblong form to a ship. It would be perfectly unnecessary to support this obvious piece of symbolism by citations. The orientation is an equally valuable example of intended symbolism. We gain an additional testimony to this from the well-known passage of Tertullian, 200 AD, about the house of our dove. Whether this corrupt extract be interpreted with Mead or Bingham, there can be no doubt that its in lucem means that the church should face the east or dayspring. The praying towards the east was the almost invariable custom in the early churches, and as symbolical as their standing in prayer upon the festivals of the resurrection, so common was orientation in the most ancient churches, that Socrates mentions particularly the church at Antioch as having its position reversed, for the altar does not look to the east but to the west. This rule appears to have been more scrupulously followed in the east than in the west, though even in Europe examples to the contrary are exceptions. See oblong. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.